Welcome to the Head Guy podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Cards in Qatar, the #1 website for all your cards and the cheapest place to buy all your cards here in Qatar, from greeting cards, birthday cards, get well cards, sorry you're leaving cards, and you're the best teacher card, which is very appropriate for my next guest. And the other sponsor is Mahaba, the #1 destination guide here in Qatar. Pick up your copy from any local supermarket or go online. And so my guest today, very special guest, is Mike Seaton.
Pleasure to be here.
Lovely to have you on, or should I say Principal Mike Seaton.
I answer to Mr. Seaton, Mike Seaton, or Principal, but the children have to call me Principal.
Isn't it funny? I was thinking about it earlier, that you were coming on, and I thought, isn't it funny how, and I don't know if you get it, but from having a principal, anyone else that I meet, I don't have an issue. I don't have any, butterflies in my stomach, but the principal's coming, and it's just like, it's weird. Do you get that?
I do get it sometimes. I can assure you that you're not in trouble as a starting point. But it's funny, even parents have commented to me over the years that sometimes when they come in to see me, a few butterflies kick in from their own school days. But I like to think that we've moved on a little bit since those times.
I'm just curious. So anyway, I just want to go back to the early days. And I've got your LinkedIn page here. I'm fascinated by your LinkedIn page. What was it like growing up in Ipswich?
Well, Ipswich is a small town in East Anglia, and it's very isolated. But actually, we have to go back a bit further than that to get a sense of my kind of internationalist outlook, which is I was born in America to a Dutch mother and a British father.
Oh, really?
One of my grandmothers was German. So I was already kind of from all over the place when I landed in Ipswich. But life in Ipswich was pretty quiet. It was...
So can I stop you?
Yeah.
Did you only live in Ipswich because you were going to school in Ipswich, or did the family live in Ipswich?
So my father was a doctor.
Okay.
So he got his consultant physician post at Ipswich Hospital, where he remained for over 2 decades. And so I spent my formative years growing up in Ipswich.
Okay, so you were going to Ipswich school every day and going home. You weren't a boarder.
No, I wasn't. In fact, I lived a 15-minute walk from school. I probably shouldn't say this as a principal, but I got very fit because I'd often run to school in the morning, and I was able to do it in 7 minutes as opposed to the 15.
Oh, so you worked out the time. That was perfect, just to get you in time.
Absolutely,
when
absolutely.
The doors opened. No, that's fascinating because I've been to Ipswich. I used to live near Colchester. What was the place called? Brightling-on-Sea.
Yeah, yeah.
And we used to go to the pantomime in Ipswich. So I never really, maybe it had its heyday, a little bit run down, or maybe it's always been like that.
It's well and truly regenerated since you were there. When I was growing up in Ipswich, my dream as a child was to be a rock star, which doesn't sound very much like a principal. And I wrote hundreds of songs, and I was going to be a singer-songwriter. And so much to my horror, not only did I not succeed in that endeavour, but Ed Sheeran, who is from Ipswich, then became one of the most famous people on the planet. And Ed Sheeran now sponsors the club that I love, Ipswich Town Football Club, and goes to all their matches. So he is living the dream that I once thought I would enjoy.
Wow. Did he go to Ipswich school as well? He
didn't. He went to Framlingham Prep, so before Framlingham College, and then he went to Thomas Mills in Framlingham. So he was literally probably a 10-minute drive from where I lived, although little did we know at the time.
So do you think Ipswich has got like a musical vibe? Or
it's great for busking. And I used to busk as a child. So I used to go busking with my friend Marcus in the town centre. And he actually ended up becoming a signed musician. So he had a band and ended up, not in the charts, but he was playing on the Jonathan Ross show a few times. So we used to busk in Ipswich. Brilliant for busking. Ed Sheeran also busked in Ipswich many years later. But he performed, one of his first gigs was at the Lion's Den, which you may have heard of, which is right next to the town hall. And my claim to fame is I also was on that same stage years before, but it's been downhill ever since, I'm afraid.
So I'm just curious, what did you play? Did you just sing or?
So I was a singer-songwriter, so I played guitar and sang, but I also played the violin, and I used to play the violin like a lead guitar. So I used to improvise on electric violin, and this was the era of the Levelers, who were a very popular band.
Yeah.
So violins were quite in vogue at the time. So it was right place, right time for me.
And what year was this? Well, just give me I just want to go back and vision you.
This is the beginning of the 90s, really, when I'm coming of age and busking in the town centre.
Okay, so were you wearing flares? What was it? What was the style that?
This could be a career-ending conversation if I'm not careful. No, I was relatively conservative. There was the odd tie-dyed T-shirt, which were very much in vogue at the time. I did have, rather embarrassingly, curtains at the time, but that was very much in fashion.
Well, I was going to say, what was your hairstyle at the time? Because you got it short now.
It was never particularly long. It was kind of certainly over the years with a kind of side part, with a centre parting, and that was in the day when centre partings were very much the thing. Mm-hmm. Sadly, that's no longer the case.
Okay, so. And what got you into music? Was it a family thing or?
So yes, my family was quite musical. My brother sang in St Paul's Cathedral as a child, so that's where obviously Prince Charles and Lady Diana got married. So he performed in lots of high-profile kind of services. I was a music scholar at Ipswich School, so I was given a music scholarship. I played violin up to grade 8 and piano. So I was brought up from the age of 4. I was playing the violin, believe it or not.
Why though? What?
Pushy parents. No, I'm joking. I think we were a musical family, and I was the youngest of 3 boys. I grew up hearing music in the house from my older brother, who went off to St Paul's. It was something that I fell into, but then actually became quite good at, and developed a real kind of instinct for it and flair for it. I stopped playing the violin for many, many years until I finally picked it up for the winter concert at King's College.
Wow, that long?
Recently, yeah. And it was a strange experience, because at first I couldn't play a note, and I thought all those years wasted. But eventually I managed to get myself into a place where I didn't embarrass the children too much with my performance.
So why did it stop?
I think when it stopped in the classical music sense. So I was, very much, I was in orchestras and chamber groups, and then I started using it almost as a lead guitar, and I was in bands and I was playing it, in that Levelers style. And then I went to university and other things took over. Once you get into the world of work, I was working initially in kind of marketing industry before I went into teaching. Things take over, life takes over, other interests evolve, and it becomes more difficult actually to maintain an active involvement in classical music. When you're at school, if you go to a good school, I was fortunate to go to a good independent school, like King's, it was kind of on a plate. You had the school orchestra, the headmaster's chamber group. You had to look a lot harder in London as a 23, 24-year-old to find those sorts of opportunities, probably.
So that was the kind of style that you were playing? What?
So I was obviously a classically trained musician, but then I developed a real interest in getting a sound out of the violin that was more akin to what you might hear a lead guitarist play.
Right.
And I was fortunate in that because I played the violin from the age of 4, I could improvise, I had a very good ear. It's perfect pitch and all that sort of stuff. So if you were to ask me to sing an A now, and please don't, but if you were to ask me to sing an A now, 15 years ago I could have sung you an A, and now if I sang it to you, it would probably be an A flat. So I've slightly lost that knack over the years. But yeah, it was just very much a part of my upbringing.
I'm just curious, do you have any old recordings lying around the house, or?
There are a few. And
do you play it to the family?
I do, and there's an old recording of me trying to look very cool, age 17, playing my guitar and singing one of my compositions, and we finally dug it out, my wife and I, a couple of years ago, and played it to my teenage daughter, and let's just say I didn't get the reaction I was hoping for.
Is there any chance that we can get hold of it and put this in the podcast?
Absolutely not. It's in a safe. It's in a safe in the United Kingdom.
Oh, come on. All right, fair enough. Yeah. So then you went to Newcastle University.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the draw to Newcastle University?
So I looked around a bunch of universities, Manchester, Newcastle. I considered the Oxbridge route, my brother went to Cambridge, and he was always the big bossy brother, and he took to Cambridge like a duck to water. I wanted something slightly different. I mean, I might not have got in, of course, but I liked where Newcastle was at that time. It reminded me a little bit of Liverpool in the 60s. You know, it felt quite happening. Kevin Keegan was in charge of Newcastle United. He'd regenerated the football club. But also, as an Ipswich boy, a small town boy, it wasn't too overwhelming. If you go to Manchester or Liverpool as an 18-year-old, 17-year-old looking around universities, it does feel a bit big.
Yeah.
Whereas Newcastle, it was a campus university. It was all in one place. And it was very close to the city centre. I mean, that's not really the academic answer you perhaps were hoping for, is it? Obviously, it's a Russell Group university with a really good reputation and tradition. And it was a great, actually, time in my life because you learn almost as much from things you do beyond the lecture hall at university as things you do in the lecture hall. And when I was at university, I was on the student newspaper, the student radio station, and I learned an awful lot from doing that. So on the student newspaper, I was sitting in an editorial room with a bunch of students of my age. One of them was a girl called Lisa, who went on to become Shadow Foreign Secretary for the Labour Party, so she went into politics.
Wow.
Another one who was best man at my wedding was a guy called Duncan, who went on to become a France 24 war correspondent. Another one ended up reading the news on BBC Radio 4 Today, and we were just literally 5 students hanging around, kind of eating kind of leftover pizza that had gone cold, and trying to come up with ideas for a newspaper. So it was amazing, actually, the people that you meet through doing things like that. I would advise any young person going to university to really think about activities beyond, the all-important lectures.
Absolutely. And why did you choose English Lit?
Always loved English Lit and adored it. And I had a teacher called Mr. Burnett at school. I think it only takes one teacher, doesn't it? One teacher can change everything. He was that teacher for me. He was an extraordinarily gifted English teacher. And when I went on to do A-level English, and I was always very good at English, there's plenty I wasn't so good at, by the way. So mathematics and sciences were not my strong suits.
Oh, really?
But very much the humanities was something I was much keener on. He really brought the whole thing to life for me when I was in the 6th form. I remember we studied the poetry of Philip Larkin, and Philip Larkin is known as quite a depressing poet who writes about the mundanity of kind of everyday existence. At the time, and the gentleman in question who was teaching me was going through quite a messy divorce, and so he was reading the poetry of Philip Larkin to us whilst going through all these personal things that he would occasionally bring into his analysis of Larkin. So the kind of kitchen sink drama stuff, I was really into that. And so loved doing it at university, and of course I taught it years later, and loved teaching it to students as well.
Nice. So then you see, I'm just curious, why is there an empty space on your LinkedIn profile? I just want to get into your thinking when you look at LinkedIn and how you think about LinkedIn, because there's a big gap between leaving university and then becoming the headmaster at Brighton College. What happened?
It's not really intentional. I promise you, I didn't go on safari for 20 years. I suppose when you set up a LinkedIn profile, everybody does it in their own way. Mine is based on my educational experiences, and specifically my educational leadership experiences. So you'll see on my LinkedIn profile page, it's all my leadership stuff. What's not on the LinkedIn page is I worked in the marketing industry for a couple of agencies. I worked with clients like, the best thing we did was the English Premier League. I worked on that account for Barclaycard, Diet Coke, some really, really good brands. I don't know, maybe I just didn't think it was relevant, or maybe I just didn't have time to go through my potted history.
So when you left university, was there, because I know companies do milk rounds and they go to various universities. So how did you end up in your first job?
So I knew that I wanted to do something with media, having got involved in media at university, as I said earlier, and I was intrigued at the time with how PR and kind of marketing worked. I thought about the route of becoming a kind of newspaper journalist, but felt that, I don't know, I could get a little bit lost in that and end up working probably for a local newspaper in a very kind of mundane part of the United Kingdom, reporting on missing cats and things like that.
So you were already thinking about that. You were already thinking about your future and how you would end up.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about what I was able to, so working in London, obviously, for a young person is fascinating. I was able to work with, I had the opportunity to work with world-class brands, and that teaches you I learned an awful lot from that, believe it or not, about leadership and what great organizations look like. And if I hadn't had those experiences, I wouldn't have been kind of the leader that I ended up becoming, I suppose, for want of a better word. But yeah, for me, it was fascinating to see how the media industry operated, and also how, in terms of good PR campaigns, there were all sorts of interesting techniques that were used, such as third-party endorsement, the power of getting the third party involved. I learned about the craft of writing a press release, and how the quotation that you use at the bottom of the press release should always say something different to the rest of the press release if you want that quotation to feature in the media later. So I was always obsessed with writing, and I very much enjoyed writing. I used to do proofreading for Diet Coke, and so working with great people and doing exciting things, I think. Perhaps I was a little bit impatient, but it gave me that opportunity to do that quite quickly.
So that was your first job down in London?
Yeah, down in London. I was a graduate trainee initially. There was 3 of us who were hired, and I stayed there for a few years. And then I kind of...
Were you commuting from Ipswich?
No, God, no. By then I was living in what can only be described as a hovel in West London, with my much more cleanly brother. So Ed, my brother, the doctor, he put me up, and unfortunately I let the side down when it came to tidying up and washing up, I'm afraid, in those early years.
Why do you think that is?
Because I'm going to see if I can segue into something. I think my school experience was very much focused on academics, which are, of course, very, very important. But in those days, schools didn't focus probably enough on the wider education. We're doing something for our sixth formers next year called The Edge, which is a course designed to teach them things like financial literacy, washing up, basic cooking skills.
I heard this and I thought, this is superb. This is brilliant.
Absolutely. And you could say that is a response to my own disastrous failings after I left university.
Where did my school go wrong? Okay, this is what I'm going to implement. Okay.
Perhaps it wasn't quite as simple as that, but it's genuinely, the number of peers at university who really didn't know how to manage their finances, manage their weekly budget, or go to a supermarket and buy the right things. You learnt by osmosis. You learnt kind of through doing it. So to actually prepare children that way, I think, is really important.
Yeah, but why? Why aren't schools doing that? Because is it because I've only recently learned about budgeting and stuff like that. Well, I haven't. My wife's done that, and I've just gone on the back of it and gone, yeah, great, that sounds great.
Yeah.
But it's a simple thing. It's an everyday thing that we need. But
it is.
Why isn't it in the curriculum?
I think the answer to that is within the UK system in particular, there is inordinate pressure on schools, obviously, to focus on getting great results. There are league tables. There are all sorts of kind of measurements in the UK that don't exist necessarily in other countries in relation to measuring school performance. So schools, as a result, focus too often and too much on that rather narrow output. The Edge, when we introduce that, it will be, there won't be a formal assessment. They won't get a grade at the end of it. And so perhaps some schools under pressure would think, could we be using that time to focus on other things? But actually, if you look at the best independent schools in the world, the most progressive independent schools in the world, they do both. And that's the important thing. It's not a question of either or. You can do both really well. So I think you'll see that more and more, but certainly schools have been a little bit slow on the uptake. And I think schools are sometimes guilty of that. Schools are sometimes guilty of not being progressive enough in their thinking, which I suppose in some ways, that earlier career benefited me in working with quite progressive brands that were always looking to evolve.
Well, that was going to be my next progression, is why did you move from, PR advertising to the educational field? What was it?
What ultimately it came down to was I was gradually moving into career paths that I felt gave something back in one way or another. So the move after the first agency I worked for was to a public sector marketing and PR agency that worked on government campaigns and initiatives. So there was, I suppose, more of a kind of benevolent focus than kind of working simply on consumer campaigns. Also, my family had an influence. Not that they were telling me what to do, but my family upbringing, all my family were doctors going back generations. It was very vocational in terms of what they chose to do and why they chose to do it.
I just want to stop you. So you had 2 older brothers?
Two older brothers. Yeah.
So you were the baby.
I was the baby. Yeah. Yeah. And my oldest brother became a doctor.
Yeah.
My father was a doctor.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a doctor. My great-grandfather was a doctor.
So your older brother fulfilled the legacy and carried on the tradition.
He carried on the tradition, and again, it sounds odd, but there was no pressure for him to do it. It just seems to keep happening.
Oh, okay. It's in the blood.
It's in the blood, but it wasn't in my blood. I spoke earlier about the, I was more into the humanities and the creative arts than the sciences. So
was that from your mum's side? Is she?
I think so. Yeah, probably. She was into the music and the kind of. She used to take me to the theatre quite a lot, so probably it was her side.
And middle brother, what?
So middle brother, so very interesting actually. So my middle brother lives in Australia and is a harp teacher. So you've got doctor, harp teacher, principal. In the old days, my brother actually was involved in monastic life. So my middle brother actually lived in a monastery for a few years. He was very spiritually inclined. And I used to look at the three of us and thought, it's all terribly Jane Austen until you get to me. Doctor, man of God, marketing consultant. So perhaps that was one of the reasons why I looked to do something more benevolent. But no, teaching was something that I never actually considered. But it's one of the purest professions in the sense that you can see the impact of what you're doing every day. And working on a marketing campaign or working in that industry, sometimes it's difficult to see the direct impact of what you've done.
True.
So job satisfaction, aside from anything else, you can as you're teaching a child, you can see them making that progress, and it's a wonderful contribution to be able to make, to actually help somebody with their life and to kind of influence them and guide them and direct them in some way.
So how was that transition for you?
It was really interesting, actually, because I made the transition, and obviously financially, I was starting again.
Yeah.
So, that had an impact. But firstly, I really enjoyed returning to literature. And actually, I was an English literature teacher. I wasn't a teacher who happened to teach English literature. I was very passionate about teaching that subject, and I suppose injecting some of what my former teacher that I mentioned earlier, had inspired in me. But it's a lot of hard work. You're working as a trainee teacher. You're literally working sometimes 17 hours a day because you're planning in the evenings. It takes a very, very long time when you're training to learn how to plan in a way that actually works. The marking, obviously, as an English teacher, marking essays. So I worked harder than I ever had. Certainly for the first years of my life, I was working obscenely long hours.
Did you question yourself at times? Because
I felt I was learning something every day and I was making an impact, and I could see that impact. That was what carried me through.
Kept you going.
Yeah, but as a teacher, really, if you're doing your job properly as a teacher, certainly in your first years, you're probably working 6 days a week, and even now, Sunday is a work day. Sorry, in this context, Saturday is a work day. So yeah, that takes some getting used to. But equally, I think sometimes people from other industries will comment wryly on teachers complaining when they have wonderful holidays. So there is definitely the counter argument that you get opportunities for great family time and time to kind of rest and recuperate.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Did you have a family at that time, or were you still on your own?
I had a family within a year of becoming a trainee teacher, really. So
Okay.
I had a wife within a year and then a baby within 2 years.
Okay, so the transition wasn't much of an upheaval for you because you were still single?
Still single at the time,
Okay.
but then very quickly I had a family. And that's
So did that put more pressure on you to make sure that this is going to work?
I think so, yeah, because my wife had come out of banking. And she was doing really well in banking, and then she left banking to become a mum. She moved into
no pressure then.
Moved into a cottage in rural Suffolk, thinking, what have I done?
Yeah.
And I used to live with the bright lights of London, and I've been taken by this trainee teacher to a pink cottage in Suffolk, where we.
Well, that could be idyllic,
in
some people's eyes.
That's what I told her. So there was, I was very much kind of carrying the fort. And so, that did put an added pressure on, certainly, but such is life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay. Do you think being a teacher poured on, what kind of skills did it, because you're a bit of a performer.
Thank you.
Did that come out when you're in front of the class?
It is in part a performance art teaching. And sometimes I say to colleagues that what you've got to understand about this school is there are hundreds of performances going on at the same time, simultaneously. That doesn't mean a performance in a kind of artificial way, because teaching is all about empathy and being real and caring for others and being supportive. And it's not about the teacher doing, doing a kind of fire juggling act at the front of the classroom. The best teachers are responsive to individual needs. They don't dominate discussion. They don't lecture for long periods. They are collegiate in their dealings with young people. So I don't want people to get the idea that if you're a frustrated actor or performing artist, then go into teaching and you can perform all day.
No.
But there is a degree of performance, of course. And there's a degree of performance in being a principal. As a principal, you have to set the tone for the school. And so, that's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, I will get there about you being the principal, but I'm still curious about the journey. You go through the training, but what's it like when you first get up and teach a class and you don't get the response? You have to deal with different personalities, etc., etc.
It's quite terrifying, because actually you get it completely wrong again and again and again and again and again. You fail and fail and fail and fail before you crack it.
In what way? What are you failing at?
Because in some professions, so for example, the previous profession I was doing, it takes a long time for you to be actually trusted with a client, right? So you start off making the tea, and and then gradually you get that exposure. In teaching, literally, very, very quickly, within a matter of what feels like a few weeks, you are in front of a class of, in those days, 30 children who look at you and just think, teach me.
Yeah.
And so that is a real challenge, because you don't know how to do it. So you're literally learning on the job. Now, I don't want parents to think that, gracious, I'm sending my children to these schools and they're being taught by these people have got no idea what they're doing. It is very measured. You don't have a full timetable. You start off maybe doing 4 lessons a week, and then it moves to 6 or 8, and there's somebody in with you, to actually watch you and intervene as necessary. But it's mildly terrifying to start with, because normally you have a bit of a run up. Whereas in teaching, very quickly, it's down to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, when you first started, was there that ambition to become a principal in the end?
So this is the really weird thing. So there absolutely wasn't. I went into it with the purest of intentions to become a teacher and to teach. Very quickly, I could see that there were issues and there was a lot of dysfunction in the first school that I was in. And when I say the first school, I don't mean the school I was training in, my first job. And all of that kind of experience of working in industry. And I was very fortunate. The agency I worked for in London was a Sunday Times best company to work for. The telephone directory was by first name, not position. I sat up opposite the CEO and a graduate trainee on my left. There was this notion of building this culture of meritocracy. It was very progressive in its thinking. And then I went into the first school, and this was a school in rural Suffolk, and teachers who'd been in the school the longest had their chair that you couldn't sit in the staff room.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I found myself very quickly becoming a head of year and line managing people that were earning more money than I was, purely because they'd survived longer. And even the way that pay scales worked then was just, if you hang on in there, you'll make more and more money. It wasn't related to performance or the difference you were making to young people's lives. We had the trades unions in England, which were very, very vocal and made it very difficult for school leaders to deal in those rare cases where there's a member of staff perhaps who has to be moved on. And so I could see very quickly all sorts of flaws in the model. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, because on the one hand, you're dealing with the students.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, now you're dealing with the teachers.
So I wasn't dealing with them to start with.
No, but if you became head of year, don't you have to...
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I like to think that I became really good in the classroom, and none of what I've said would have been of any consequence if I hadn't been good in the classroom.
Exactly, yeah.
Fundamentally, you have to be really, really good in the classroom before you could even think about anything else.
Yeah.
And I always say, when I appoint senior leaders, I always say we always find out are they outstanding in the classroom? Because there's no point having somebody in a senior position telling people how it's done when, frankly, they're not very good at doing it.
Yeah, you're rubbish in the classroom.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. I served my time and was obsessed with becoming the best teacher I could possibly be. Obsessed probably is the right word. I spent a lot of time on it, kind of honing my craft, I suppose. And, it all depends. In terms of managing others, it all depends in the context. This first context was a school that would have been deemed satisfactory by Ofsted. Probably today would be deemed less than that. It was a coasting school in a rural part of Suffolk that had ambled along over the years. And I joined that school, and that was my first gig. And I'm delighted I joined that school. Probably I learned more, and I often do learn more from seeing things done wrong, and badly than actually. If you join something that's working fantastically well, every part is moving, there's total synchronicity in the environment you're working in. Sometimes it just feels like, okay, this is the way it should be. But there were flaws, and I started to spot those flaws, and I started to draw a rather strange comparison between the way that I'd been managed and the way that other people had been managed, and this sense of dynamism that existed in private industry versus what I was experiencing in this school. And I left that school eventually, and it did go into decline. It was already in decline, but subsequently, it got a lot worse before it got better, and it was like a death spiral.
Wow. And when we're talking about Suffolk, was it like a quiet town school, or was it in a
Yeah, I'm not going to name the school. And you asked
no,
me,
you don't have to, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, this is why I don't put everything on LinkedIn, you see. I have to protect my sources. It was a rural, very small town in Suffolk.
So it was a good place to really start for you to see how.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the kids were lovely, and I think that was part of the issue. The kids were great. And if I'm visiting a school and somebody says to me the kids here are great, I always think that's great, but what does that reveal? Because they are deemed great, does that mean that they're not necessarily being stretched and challenged?
Oh yeah,
as much as they could be.
I had this image of the teachers being very comfortable in a rural setting, going to a quiet school. The students aren't being pushed, so they're quite happy because
it was a bit like that.
Yeah,
my favourite chair,
absolutely.
So yeah, it was a little bit like that, and it was lovely in many ways. I don't want you to.
And you're in the cottage as well, life couldn't be better.
Life could have just ended there.
So you could have really just slotted in and go, okay, this is my life for the rest.
Yeah, but I have a nasty habit of making things difficult for myself. Unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I felt that, and I could feel that you ruffled a few feathers.
But possibly.
So did you get out after, I've made my mark, now's the time to...
So then I was given an opportunity to become a director of learning, and that was in a school that was becoming an academy. And I was really interested in that because this was the new Labour era in the UK, where the notion of an academy school was a completely new concept. And what they were doing was they were taking schools in the UK that were underfunded, not performing well, and were literally falling apart at the seams. And they were creating new builds, fantastic kind of new learning environments. Invariably, I'm afraid they were also changing the leadership team because that was necessary, appointing what were called superheads in those days, people who'd had great success elsewhere, and trying to drastically improve the life chances of children in difficult areas.
And was this from a certain age that you could go to these academies, or
it was 11 and up? So
okay, so like a secondary school, but they're calling them academies rather than
and now actually if when I'm interviewing a teacher now from the UK, invariably they will call it an academy. You hear the word school used less and less now because more and more schools have been converted into academies. But the first phase of this process was quite exciting for somebody like me, given everything that I've told you, because there was an acceptance at that time from the government that things weren't good enough in the state sector. Things needed to improve, and there were certain areas, sink areas of the UK, that were not being helped by the quality of education there. And so they were pumping a lot of money into getting the best leaders in those schools, into creating a really good learning environment for the children. And I was part of that experiment. And I came in as a director of learning in that role. So you can see, for me, that was a very dynamic kind of and progressive place to be.
I can feel it. I could feel that you were suited for that position. But the academy, is it still following the curriculum? Or is there some other subjects that they added?
So yes, it followed the national curriculum, but they developed sort of focal points and specialisms as well. The specialism that they focused on in this particular environment was entrepreneurship. The academy was founded by a very kind of well-known billionaire, basically, who wanted to give something back to the community, who had learnt everything from, he'd had a bad school experience himself, become an entrepreneur. And he was inspired actually to set this school up, having visited prisons in the UK and realised that just how many prisoners can't read and can't write. And so he made that link very quickly between the fact that they've been failed in the education system and then have gone on to a life of crime. So all of this was quite exciting and inspiring to be part of.
Yeah. So how long were you doing that role?
So I was there for a few years before I moved internationally. And when I moved internationally, we were in a situation as a family where my daughter was getting a little bit older.
Hold on, why did you move internationally, and why isn't it on your LinkedIn page? Because you literally have got from UAE. Why? What? Your educational background still isn't on LinkedIn. Why?
But I think I've just focused on LinkedIn on my leadership experience.
It's not good enough. I would have I'm with you because I did have my LinkedIn page where it was literally just Ginger Camel CEO, and I thought, that's good enough. I've done it for 12 years. That's me. But actually, I think
the way I look at it is, I also made the tea for Chris Evans at Virgin Radio and did work experience, but I'm not going to put that on the CV.
No, I know, but that's although Chris might want to get hold of you to say you made a great cup of tea.
Chris, if you're listening, I'm available. No, so that was so that international experience began.
Yeah, so why did you feel that you had to spread your wings and move abroad? What was it?
There was a few reasons, but if I can be honest, part of it was lifestyle. Okay. I think the lifestyle for the family growing up. I think lots of people who live in Doha will understand that.
So the cottage had got too small?
It ran its course, but also I was, like lots of parents, looking at catchment areas. And because of this academy that I was working in, we were in that catchment. And to be perfectly honest with you, it was in a good place, but it served a community of students and children that in many cases had difficult family lives, etc., etc. So there was that opportunity basically and life transforms, as many of your listeners will know, when you move overseas to an environment a little bit like this. Life chances of your own child, opportunities there for them to kind of evolve and progress. Yeah. So that was probably what led us to that point.
So was the UAE the first place that you moved to?
No, the first place I moved to was.
I'm just looking at your LinkedIn.
I think we're about to get into the LinkedIn years.
Okay.
In a second, if you can just hold on. So I was in Jakarta, Indonesia, at a school called the British School Jakarta, which was similar to like an embassy school.
Okay.
Yeah, like the big embassy school in.
And what stood out for you to apply for that? What was the position?
So the position was head of section, but what stood out, I suppose, was it sounds really kind of cosmetic and shallow. I was like, wow, look at that school. Goodness me, I can see my daughter in that school. Just fantastic facilities, incredible theatre, incredible 50-metre Olympic pools, and just an amazing environment for her to grow in. And also, my family is, on my mother's side, is Dutch, and my grandparents lived in Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony once upon a time. Okay. So it was a bit of a family thing there.
So going back to your roots.
Kind of, a little bit of that going on. So that was a really, really enjoyable experience. I enjoyed that a great deal.
How long were you there for?
3 years.
Okay.
So I enjoyed that a great deal. And I think it's fair to say that it's still kind of was formative in the sense that I saw for the first time what is possible with a school with a really, really great learning environment, great facilities, children who really want to learn, families who are ultra supportive. So that was a really interesting time for me.
Mm. So why move?
Because I had an opportunity to become founding head of senior school at Brighton, which was a startup, and Brighton College in Al Ain, which was a school that was centred on the ethos and values of Brighton College in the UK, which was recently named by the Times as the British School of the Decade. So this was an early experiment in a famous British school exporting its name overseas. So doing that from startup was really, really exciting and exhilarating as an experience, because basically you're in the desert and you are trying to build something from nothing, and you are trying to build something that reflects and does justice to the Brighton College name as quickly as possible.
Interesting. Was there, so no pressure then?
You can see there's a trend emerging, isn't there? That was the most formative experience of all. And there have been a few, because you get the 360 on school leadership. Because when you are setting something up from nothing, apart from obviously support from Brighton College in the UK, but it is pretty much from nothing, because you've got to hire a completely new common room, none of whom have worked with each other before, bricks and mortar, evolving around you. You've not got an audience, you've not got any kids in your school to start with. That was a really interesting experience. Yeah,
but I'm just curious, because you're setting something new up, but then you've got. So are you? What's the roadmap? What's the plan on the table when? Okay, it's a new school, but then what are you taking from the school in the UK? So is it just the look and feel, or is it just the uniform, or is it, because as you say, you're bringing in brand new teachers who haven't worked at this school. So how do do you spend time in the school in the UK to get the kind of feel and the vibe and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to develop as close as you can get to a replica school. Okay, now you can't do it exactly the same. You're in a different cultural context, of course, but there were lots of kind of how we do things conversations with leaders at Brighton College in the UK. Obviously, we had access to their curriculum, to their academic planning, etc., access to all of their policies, access to individuals as and when we needed them. Yes, things like the uniform are obvious, but there was a bit of a hand in glove working with them. But not all of it works in your context.
No.
You can't. It's not as simple as, okay, we'll have all your schemes of learning, and we'll just teach them in the same order at the same time. You've got different children. You've got more children who have English as an additional language. They've got a heritage of over 100 years of excellence, high selectivity.
But do they But does the school in the UK mind that you adapt?
Not at all.
Is that accepted?
No, and there is always an acceptance that this is a partnership, and that the kind of sweet spot that you want to get to is you develop and evolve a relationship with the mothership where they end up also learning from you.
Okay.
And that's when you know it's really when they take things away that you're doing. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship, but clearly there is a mothership, and that mothership is obviously in our context now King's College UK, and there it was of course Brighton College. So you learn in terms of ethos, values, policies, procedures, academic planning, support with staffing, interview, for certain staff, those staff would be interviewed, senior staff, by Brighton College as well in the UK. It's the same very much with King's College with us, but an acceptance that the cultural context needs to be, obviously respected.
I just want to ask, because when you're hiring teachers, they're coming out to a new country where, in the UK, they've probably got family, they've got support systems, etc., etc., and then you're bringing teachers over to a new environment. How do you support them? But also, they're going to experience life differently, or they might be coming out at your school might be their first school, and they're experiencing something completely different. So they might be here to, all right, I'll stick it out for a year, 2 years. I'm going to have a good time, but also So how do you deal with that?
So the first thing is there's an acceptance that the relationship between colleagues in a school environment internationally is very different from the relationship in a school, for example, in the UK, because you will forge friendships and you will rely on one another in a way that isn't the case where you've got other networks in your kind of home country. It's really, really important in any organisation, however, that people feel that they're part of something that is exciting, that they're learning every day, that there's an opportunity to, I suppose, build legacy and do something positive. And that there's that kind of, again, that sweet spot of challenge and support, you know, where they get the support they need. If there's a personal issue, it's swiftly and seamlessly dealt with through HR. If there's some sort of cultural kind of learning that needs to go on, that we put them in front of the right people. But equally, they're challenged every day to become better practitioners. And one thing that characterises all of the schools I've led is they are driven by a sense of momentum and a sense of wishing to recruit people and make them better practitioners, and for them to learn every day and get better. And I think there are some people that won't appeal to. You know, there are some people who aren't looking for that school. You know, they want perhaps fun in the sun.
So you make it clear even before.
Absolutely, we don't want to work with people who aren't slightly obsessive about education and wanting to make the world a better place in their own way. And we avoid people who for whom it seems like a route into an exciting lifestyle. So yeah, that process of selection is very important.
And are you involved with that, or do you have special people that go and find these people?
Yeah. So I mean, there's in different contexts there have been different ways of doing it. I do a lot of recruitment on LinkedIn. Luckily, I don't ask them for their entire career history. Otherwise, we wouldn't get very far. But no, LinkedIn is very good. I used to headhunt via LinkedIn a lot, even like 10 years ago. But TES is the usual channel that we'll use to advertise to teachers. That's like the main kind of recruitment portal for teachers globally. You know, in a startup situation, and I've led 2 startups, it would be me doing all of the interviews because I'd be the only guy working at the beginning at the school. In the current context, a lot of those interviews will be delegated to my leadership team, but we're always obviously acting as one in terms of what we want from staff coming into country.
Yeah, superb. So you were doing the Brighton College for 3 years.
Yep.
And then you moved back to the UK.
So it was. Excuse me. Yeah, that's right. It was Brighton College for 3 years, and then it was the UK. So basically, I worked as a head of senior school at Brighton College, and then I went to the UK where I was headmaster of Huddersfield Grammar School in the UK. You know why that is, don't you?
No.
It's family reasons.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had to move back.
Had to move back because of an issue involving one of my children.
Okay. All right. So how was that for you, moving back after you've experienced living abroad?
So great. It was good to be part of a global schools group. So Cognita was a really good global schools group to work with. They had 40 schools in the UK, and to become a headmaster in the UK. Having worked overseas as a headmaster, it used to be quite a rare thing to be able to go back in as a headmaster in the UK, having become a headmaster overseas. So it was great to be able to do that. But I don't necessarily, in terms of career, I don't really look at the UK as home. I look at the UK as another territory. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because my career is international, so the UK is another territory really now. But yeah, obviously the opportunity to lead an independent school in the UK that was very successful in West Yorkshire was great, because it enabled me to, I suppose there was a personal satisfaction in terms of being able to succeed in the UK in an independent school, having, I suppose, made my name overseas.
Well, I am curious, what was the reaction from teachers in the UK? Because here's someone that's come from abroad, found success abroad, and now going home and going, hey, I'm the man.
I think that the reaction was... it was good, but I think that I was fortunate in that Cognita was a global schools group. So more and more now, the independent schools are owned by global schools groups. And so there is a kind of open-mindedness that didn't necessarily exist kind of once upon a time. So there were teachers within the school who'd worked overseas themselves. But yeah, I imagine there was a bit of kind of, this will be interesting. But yeah, I accepted. It was a lovely place to work. And, it was a successful time as well, because we won our first national award as a school, Independent Schools Association, successful change management.
That was under you?
That was under me.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were really, really pleased about that. We broke into the Sunday Times league tables for the first time during my time there. So it was a really great experience. And again, it was in that particular school environment, I think it was a good point for the school to evolve a little bit. My successor, after that experience, I would say stabilized things in terms of not making further changes, because we were by then operating in the middle of the COVID pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And so it's all about context. If I'd come into that school in the middle of the COVID pandemic, we probably wouldn't have changed anything. Do you know what I mean? We would have been, let's keep things nice and stable. Yeah. And she became that person kind of probably after a period of change while I was there. But yeah, that was a good experience. People in Yorkshire are amongst the most friendly people in the world. They call you love all the time. Yeah.
Well, I lived in Nottingham, so that was under Yorkshire, but they're very similar. Very friendly.
Yeah, very friendly environment, a great community school. So really, really enjoyed working there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that was for 3 years. You've got a tendency to do things for 3 years, and then you decided to go to China?
So then I was offered the opportunity to be a founding head of a King's College school in China, which was a really exciting opportunity to bring something to Chengdu, which is in central China, which had never had a school like us before. So it's exporting one of the most famous schools in the world, King's College School in Wimbledon, to central China. And what was exciting about it was there was an opportunity to basically create a bilingual school which blended the Chinese national curriculum with the English national curriculum.
Wow.
So we taught the mandatory Chinese national curriculum up until IGCSE and then on to A-level. But yeah, that particular opportunity was a very difficult one because it was in the middle of the pandemic. And so I was out there for a long period of time, not able to travel back to England and see my family.
But did you even have any students turning up to the school?
Oh yeah, they turned up all right.
Oh right.
Yeah, so we had the biggest opening pupil roll of any school like that in Chengdu. So it was a great start, but it was very, very difficult to manage because we had lots of staff who couldn't see their families.
Oh wow.
Because the Chinese kind of approach to managing the pandemic, as you've probably read, was incredibly stringent.
Yeah.
So, just coming over there, I spent 3 weeks in quarantine in a hotel room, and I got served food in a plastic bag twice a day, which was nice.
Was it?
So it was a
lot
very
of noodles and a lot of rice.
Yeah, I love Chinese food, but it was a challenging experience in terms of staffing, and getting staff into a place where they felt happy and supported, because they literally couldn't go home. Now, happily, the situation in China is much more settled, and those restrictions have lifted. So,
how did you handle it though?
They hadn't while I was there.
How did you handle it mentally? Because you're having to deal with yourself and dealing in a pandemic. Plus, you're having to look after staff as well.
Yeah, it was challenging, and the challenging thing about it was that we didn't know what the plan was, because it's just a different nature of government. In the UK, you have your roadmap out of it, and the general public are told what that roadmap looks like, and that's not the case in China. So you literally aren't told anything.
So you're second guessing all the time.
You're second guess. Nobody knows what will happen next, and when a decision is made, it's made immediately, and it changes everything. But nobody knows when that decision will come, and so when you can't offer that degree of certainty, is not the right word, but at least an inkling of the direction this will take, then you get lots of rumours. So that can be quite difficult.
Yeah, that doesn't make your life easy if you're looking after people.
No, so that can be a challenge. But ultimately, again, you come back to the fact that it's a job, and that there was an opportunity to build something new, and there's an opportunity for, whilst people are in this difficult situation, for them to be bonded by the experience. Everybody was very much in the same boat. There are far worse stories, of course, to tell about the pandemic than this one. People looked after each other, but yeah, it was a challenging time for the world, but a particularly challenging time to be in China, because of everything I've said. A, you didn't know when it was going to end in terms of the restrictions, and B, you didn't know what the kind of plan was, if that makes sense, out of it.
Yeah. So did you feel like you achieved something there? When
Yeah.
you left, was it a point where you were happy?
I was happy enough. If I'm completely honest, if it hadn't been for the COVID pandemic, I probably wouldn't have been curtailed as early as it was.
Yeah.
But I had family that I'd not seen by the end for 15 months. So that ultimately made my mind up and had to make my mind up.
So it's still going? It's still...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a flourishing school. So we opened with really good numbers. It's completely Chinese. So I say completely, almost totally Chinese in terms of the pupils. So it wasn't like going to a school that relied on kind of expatriates to populate it, which would have been very challenging. But essentially the school was set up largely for Chinese learners to develop strong English and have access to British qualifications that would then give them access to world-class universities. But in China, the regulations are quite strict. So the mandatory teaching of the Chinese national curriculum had to take place up until the beginning of GCSE. So that's an interesting kind of...
Yeah, that's an interesting mix.
It's an interesting mix.
And how do you find the right teachers for that? Do you have to hire locally as well as
internationally? Because it was a bilingual school, we hired lots of Chinese teachers and lots of British teachers. But what we tried to do was deliver the Chinese national curriculum in a way that was infused with kind of Western pedagogy. So it was the delivery of a Chinese curriculum, but in a slightly more international mode of delivery. Yeah. So if we were teaching entirely in the kind of Chinese way, it would have been very much rote learning, very old school. So we took the content, we took the requisite knowledge, skills and understanding, and we converted that into something that was delivered in an engaging and an exciting way for young people. But it is a difficult, it's a difficult balance to strike.
Yeah.
But those are the regulations. So in a bilingual setting, it's Chinese national curriculum, and then you have the opportunity later to introduce international qualifications.
Wow. So I take it you didn't get any chance to look around China while you were
No,
there?
not really.
It's a shame.
Yeah, it's a great shame.
Beautiful country.
So I was only in 2 places during my time there. I was in Shanghai, which is where I landed, and spent 3 weeks in quarantine. Then I was in Chengdu and then back to Shanghai to eventually leave. So yeah, really, really interesting. It's been a great joy to see lots of my old colleagues on their kind of social pages sharing photographs of them traveling China. Didn't happen under my time, but at least those individuals have had an opportunity subsequently to see a lot of China, because obviously you spoke earlier about selling the opportunity.
Yeah.
When we were recruiting into the school, the UK, which is where we were sourcing most of our international teachers from, was in a really bad place with COVID. And China at that time was viewed globally as the model for how to get out of it.
Well,
because everybody was walking around. So I made it sound like we were all confined. It was a different way of managing the pandemic. In the UK, you had your stringent lockdowns where everybody was locked in their houses, essentially. In China, throughout the entirety of my experience there, you walked around freely where you were, with masks, but you walked around freely where you were.
Right.
You weren't I wasn't locked down really at any point during my time there, but you couldn't move out of the locale,
Of that area,
and you
yeah.
certainly couldn't fly back and forth. So it was a different scenario. But yeah, we were selling to British teachers. You're gonna have more freedom in this environment because you can actually walk about the place. And at the time at which we were recruiting into the school, everybody we were recruiting was in their house.
Yeah, so
under lock and key,
yeah.
looking for a way out.
I'll take it. Yeah.
Incredible times we've all lived through, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then you get the call to come over here.
Yeah, so here I am, and this has been the smoothest transition of any throughout my career. And this is where I want to settle now. There's been movement. I was swept around a little bit by COVID, to say the least. And so it's time now to leave a bit of legacy over the next years here. In terms of transition into Qatar, it's a very, very easy place to transition into because I've worked in the Gulf before, obviously, so there are some similarities. But very, very quickly I felt at home. We get a lot of support from the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in terms of the 2030 vision. It's an exciting time to be working in education, obviously, in Qatar. And so it's a privilege to be part of that push towards 2030.
And I loved, because I knew the previous headmaster or principal.
Yeah.
Completely different to you. So when you came bounding onto the stage,
yeah,
it was like, well, okay, there's going to be some change. Now, is it just coincidence that there was a lot of teachers that left when you started, or
Oh goodness me, what a question to have to answer. No, it's.
No, I'm just curious. Sometimes teachers feel that, okay, there's going to be change. I don't want to be part of it, or
absolutely not. So
Okay.
the teachers who left before I started.
Okay.
Sometimes there are teachers who leave in year for various reasons, although that's to a minimum. But when people finish their contracts, they do leave. There is a transience in teaching. But no, I will take responsibility for many things, but I can't take responsibility for people who've decided to leave before I've actually arrived in the school.
Okay.
So retention is actually really, really good for next year.
And so how does the future look?
Really exciting. Obviously, we have an opportunity here to grow the school further. Our applications are up 80% on last year. Because there's a lot of, I think, excitement in the community around what we're doing next in terms of extending the school, opening a sixth form for the first time, and really offering parents something a little bit different. I think that with King's College moving forward, we will continue to offer that British independent school education overseas, and I'd like to draw a distinction between international schools and us, because I think that is an important distinction to draw. I think that I've worked in international schools in Jakarta. I wouldn't class us as an international school. I class us as a British independent school overseas. How is that different? Well, it's important to state the difference. Some international schools, and there are many really good international schools in Qatar, some international schools can be frequented by as many teachers from as many different countries as pupils. And that sometimes, not always, but sometimes can have a negative impact in terms of the delivery of a consistent curriculum, where you have competing philosophies in the common room, teachers who've been trained in very different ways, who have very different methodology and approaches. And so you can sometimes get a smorgasbord of
Very good.
I thought I'd throw in a long word, of kind of inconsistency. Whereas we are very British in our outlook. Obviously, we're twinned with King's College in the UK. Most of our teachers are British trained.
I didn't realise that.
Most of them are British trained. And so there is that degree of consistency because they've been through teaching that curriculum and they understand what it is that we're trying to bring to the table. And the other difference I would say is a British independent school, one thing that great British independent schools are known for is for having a truly holistic approach to education, where they offer a wide array of kind of co-curricular activities. International schools very regularly offer extracurricular activities, and there is a distinction between the two. An extracurricular activity is often a kind of bolt-on extra that is entirely optional and a great thing for a child to take up if they so wish. What British independent schools do is they take the co-curriculum much more seriously. They kind of insist upon full involvement from children in the wide array of activities beyond the classroom that they can offer, which creates that notion of the whole child being the whole point. And so next year we're offering electives in the school day as well as CCAs after school, which means that 100% of our children from year 3 and above will do 4 electives as part of their school day before the school day even finishes every day, or pretty much every day. So that means that we're kind of turbocharging that focus on a holistic education. And why is that important? Well, look at the chat, GTP. I always get that the wrong way around.
Yeah, I do as well.
I think it's chat GTP. When you look at what's happening, there's a paradigm shift going on, and education will have to adapt to that. But I've spoken to, I was at a conference with a futurologist who was talking about how will humankind survive the rise of the machines and the rise of AI. And for me, and for this individual, it's those innately human qualities, intellectual curiosity, care for others, creativity. These are the traits that children need to learn that computers can't necessarily do.
Absolutely.
And so we have something called the King's Identity now, which is focused around 5 C's, which we're trying to imbue in our young people. We're not just teaching them maths and English and science. Through doing it, and through what we'll be doing in electives next year and CCAs after school, we want to develop their qualities as young people and their character, because we think that with this paradigm shift, those human qualities are going to be more critical than ever moving forward.
Absolutely, 100%. No, I'm really pleased to hear that. And I am curious.
Yeah.
Chat GPT.
Yeah.
When children have got assignments,
Yeah, I know.
how are you going to...
If any principal in the world tells you that they've got this one cracked, they'll be lying. Nobody is on top of it yet, because it does create immense challenges, particularly the regenerate button, which means that a child can get any number of different essays written for it. I did have a colleague who will remain nameless who gave me a proposal yesterday. I said, "You did that on ChatGPT, didn't you?" And they said, "How did you guess?" So it is possible to spot these things quite quickly.
Yeah.
What I would, and by the way, that's an excellent colleague, and she worked in absolute alignment with ChatGPT to actually produce something very worthwhile. So it is a useful tool, but also there are all sorts of fantastic opportunities that it presents. So, for example, as a semi-retired English teacher, one of the most important things you can do as a teacher is modelling what a good one looks like. If you're asking a child to write a persuasive speech, great teachers will show an example of a great speech. They'll get the children to highlight and annotate what those features and success criteria are, and then do one of their own. If you go onto Chat, GTP, it's a wonderful opportunity to create modelled examples of what a good one can look like. So I can imagine as an English teacher, the children have got their computer in front of them. You say, let's have a go at writing a persuasive speech. Let's type in a command. Let's see what ChatGPT comes up with. Now let's annotate and highlight where those success criteria appear in that speech and where its failings are. How can we be better than the machine? Now it's up to you to write one. But you can see already controlled assessment, which is assessment under conditions rather than, children doing coursework at home. Already controlled assessment is much more prevalent now in British education than it was 10 to 15 years ago. And I think we will probably see kind of as things continue, more of a focus on controlled assessment to deal with these sorts of issues with plagiarism. However, what my hope is for the future is that schools won't collectively panic and become really punitive rather than being creative in thinking how they can work in alignment with these platforms, because we can't pretend they're not there, and actually we should embrace them.
Absolutely.
The other day I managed to kind of come up with a holiday itinerary for my family over the summer through the use of that AI platform.
Oh, good idea.
I asked it for a 10-day camper van holiday to the west coast of America, and it gave me all 10 days, fully itinerarized and costed. And then I said, well, why is it in dollars? Sorry, sir, here's it in pounds. So it does have its benefits, and great educators will always adapt to technology and actually use it for the benefit of young people.
I'm just curious, will it be beneficial for the teacher as well? You mentioned how the workload of a teacher doesn't just stop in the classroom. It's in the evening, marking test results, etc. Could there be an AI system that literally...
Yeah, I mean, already that's beginning to happen. Marking, there's been lots of debate over marking over the years, because marking has to be impactful. And traditionally teachers have spent hours upon hours marking papers in incredibly comprehensive ways, and it's destroyed lots of their personal lives. Absolutely. Because they spend many hours doing it, and then those comments may not be acted upon and read and acknowledged. And so already before this platform, schools were looking at ways to work with teachers to ensure that marking was what we refer to as smart. It was targeted. It was much more concise, but also there are opportunities to what we call close the feedback loop. So when you mark a piece of a paper, you then provide an opportunity in a future lesson for the child to revisit the targets you set and fulfill the targets there and then. So you can see that they've made that leap from the feedback to, too often education reinvents the wheel and time is wasted. And certainly platforms that can support teachers with that process will be important, but nothing should ever divorce the human contact between a teacher and the child. And there are plenty of pitfalls if teachers were to rely on these sorts of AI platforms to do their job for them. That we simply can't delegate things to a machine just yet. The importance of every child being seen and known and understood by every every adult in the building is really important. That's one thing we're really good at. Every birthday is celebrated at our school. A child has a birthday, I'll sit down with them and have some cake. They'll have the cake and I'll watch, because I'm not allowed to eat the cake because my wife's banned me.
Well, I was going to say, how has that journey been since arriving here? Because they do say that you get the Doha stone in the first year.
Oh, the journey in terms of with the school?
No, with you putting.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I'm
health-wise.
I'm hoping that this isn't a subtle comment about my
no, not at all.
My ballooning size. I like to think I'm not yet at the Elvis in Vegas phase. But yeah, you have to keep an eye on it, don't you? You have to keep an eye on it. And
I was just wondering about all these birthdays, and you're there with these cakes.
I watch them eat the cake.
Okay.
I watch them eat the cake. I don't participate.
But that was after instruction from your wife.
Yes, if we're being strictly true about this. And you're going to say to me next, and she's here. No, yeah. Look, I did this in Huddersfield as headmaster in Huddersfield Grammar School. I introduced this, and it worked brilliantly. And neither did I. In those days, my wife actually worked next door to me. She was on reception, so she really kept a very strict eye on my consumption of cake. But yeah, look, I need to get down the gym, I think, probably, and I'm working too hard. That's the problem, Stefan. I'm not finding the time to actually.
That balance. Need to look after that,
Yeah, we spoke about role modelling for children.
Absolutely.
I need to be a better role model, and rather than wearing an ill-fitting suit to work, I need to
tracksuit and short, t-shirt, shorts.
I'm not sure that's the dress code, but we could evolve.
Oh, I need to ask that just before we finish up.
Yeah,
because my son has an issue with the school uniform. Finds it. He doesn't like restriction. He likes the feel of. Lycra kind of shorts, the freedom,
right,
etc. Not the lycra, because that's very.
Yeah.
I know, there's always the link between the UK and here, but we're in a different climate. Is there any kind of thinking that just to change the uniform in a way that's more in line with the climate, rather than got to wear a very heavy blazer, shirt, tie, which is very restrictive?
We have our tradition, which is our uniform, and I'm a great believer in school uniform. The important thing.
Same here.
Yeah, great. The important thing is that what we do is consistent. So there are times when we invite the children to take their blazers off. Invariably, when it's the particularly hot summer months, if you like, they will not wear their blazers around the school. They may have those in their lockers. And it's hugely and insanely hot days. It may be that we give them permission to take the ties off as well. But what we can't have is a free-for-all, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. It's important that we maintain our standards whilst giving flexibility to the children to adapt their uniform in particularly hot climates. Obviously, our buildings are air-conditioned. They spend a lot of time indoors during the school day, so it only becomes an issue, really. And the unfortunate thing is, as parents experience drop-off. And drop-off is hot.
It is hot.
They say goodbye to their little darlings and probably think we're terribly cruel making them wear the blazers. But they get into the building and obviously it's air-conditioned and a lot cooler. So
no, that's what I say to him. Look, you're only in between the car and the entrance to the school.
Yeah.
And then you're in an AC condition. What's the problem?
Yeah, it isn't a huge problem for most of them. I don't think they would complain about it. But certainly, we have days when they come in their PE kits, of course, at the moment when they've got PE. So I wouldn't want your listeners to get the impression that we insist that they wear bowler hats and kind of Parker jackets.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
No, but as I was growing up, we moved. When my dad got promoted, we were moved to different parts of the country, and I had a choice. When I was about 13 or 14, I had a choice between two schools. One had no school uniform and the other one had school uniform.
Yep.
And I went for the school uniform because I could see that, there's a tradition, there's respect.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's actually, I think, a kind thing to do because children can be very competitive in terms of what they wear these days.
Exactly.
And so if you have a school with no uniform, it can become a real issue for some children, and there should be particularly if you're looking at, I mean, we're fortunate, obviously, in Doha to have, a situation where we have families who may be on good packages and can afford to send their children to very good schools. But in England, there's parts of England where that's not the case, and school uniform is a great leveler.
Absolutely.
It means that the child whose parents can't afford that new pair of trainers, doesn't get the kind of snide comments. So I think uniform is important. It presents a good corporate image. It reflects our aspirations for the children, but it's also good for their well-being.
Superb.
I think.
So, you're my longest podcast so far.
Blimey, I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, I think it's a very good thing. Anything else to say? Do you want to... Anything to...
Just really excited about the future. Really excited to be opening a sixth form for the first time next academic year. I think when King's College Doha began life, it began life really as a prep school. So I think there may be some people in the community who think, oh yeah, King's College Doha is that lovely prep school. But actually, pupils up to year 10 and a sixth form coming online with some fantastic facilities with the sixth form centre, seminar rooms, a brilliant head of sixth form who we've appointed, who comes from one of the leading schools in the UK. He's a Cambridge Blue, very sporty, good cricketer. So we're really pleased with that appointment and looking forward to this exciting new chapter.
Oh, superb.
All good.
I look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Just a quick shout out to our sponsors again. It's Cards in Qatar, the #1 website for all your card needs, birthday cards, greeting cards, farewell teacher cards, you're a great teacher card, and Mahaba, the #1 destination guide here in Qatar. Take care. See you next week. Bye-bye.